Alrighty guys, so the last thing that we're going to look at in this unit is the regulation of businesses, and it ties in directly with market structures, because usually the government kind of keeps their hands off unless there's a lack of competition, because generally the market will regulate itself unless there's not a good amount of competition. So the government tries to prevent monopolies and oligopolies from forming, like we saw with that blocked merger of AT&T and Verizon, because they're worried that if there's not enough competition, the businesses will collude together, they'll set their prices higher, and that'll be bad for the individuals, that'll be bad for consumers. All right, specific cases where they don't do that is when it comes to inventions, right? Like with that Daraprim drug, all right, they're not going to force them to lower down their price, they're not going to force them to let competition into the market, because they really want to give them the incentive to develop new things. Right? We want to be the first ones with a cure for cancer or a cure for AIDS. And so we want to give these pharmaceutical companies an incentive to develop new things. All right, so when there isn't that level of competition, we have what's called predatory pricing. That's what we see with the EpiPen or that Daraprim drug. They're able to set their prices higher because there isn't competition. All right, same thing with a lot of medicines, really. Like our whole pharmaceutical industry, whether it's insulin, whether it's those EpiPens, right? These businesses are setting their prices really high because there's not a lot of competition in these markets. All right, after the Google Meet today, I'm going to ask you to watch this video on New York cosmetology and regulations. But let's look at some ways that the government regulates businesses to start out with. All right, a couple of organizations like the FDA or OSHA are in charge of making sure that the businesses themselves are being run in a healthy, safe way. Right? OSHA is the Occupational Safety Health Administration. The USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, they regulate food and meat and things like that to make sure that it's safe. But the government does this especially in cases where there's not competition, because businesses won't have an incentive to help the consumers because they're not fighting against other businesses. So antitrust laws are ones that break up monopolies, like with the Rockefeller oil at the beginning of the last century, to make sure that there's a good amount of competition. So Rockefeller Oil, or Standard Oil, was broken up into like 15 different gas companies. So today, like Amoco, Texaco, those used to be Standard Oil, but the government broke them up because they had too much market power, too much control. All right, the government oversees these mergers, like we talked about with Verizon and AT&T, to make sure that no one company gets too much power. And so the government generally likes to keep their hands off. All right, unless there's potential wrongdoing, unless there's some risk to the consumers. All right, so what we've seen over the past 3 years under the Trump administration is a big process of deregulation, where the government are removing safety standards, health standards. They're trying to take less of a role in the economy, with the idea being that if there's less government regulation, businesses will profit more, will prosper more, that'll bring in more jobs. But with anything, there's a trade-off, right? We have these regulations for a reason. It could be to keep the consumers safe. It could be to keep the workers safe. All right, but if we get rid of this competition, or get rid of these regulations, the theory is that it would allow for more competition. More competition means higher quality, right? It means higher quality and lower prices. All right, and so we see this with airlines. When the government removed safety restrictions on airlines back in the 80s and 90s, planes didn't go crashing. It's in an airlines company's best interest not to crash planes. And so by removing these regulations, it made it easier to operate these airline industries. You have more airlines pop up, and now you can get a flight to the West Coast for 65 bucks. All right, whereas before you couldn't because there wasn't a lot of competition there. So this deregulation is the removal of restrictions by the government. And we've seen a lot of this over the past 3 years. All right, and so I do want you to copy down this chart on your notes or on a blank sheet of paper. This is a really easy graphic organizer that can help you keep everything together in one place of how we identify these market structures. So again, a perfect competition would be like gas stations, right? You've got a lot of sellers. All right, hold on, let me over here. All right, so for the number of firms, we've got a lot of sellers who don't have a lot of control over their prices, all right, because there's no differentiation in it, right? All gas is the same, whether it's at an Amoco, Texaco, Shell, BP, Racetrack. You know, once that gas is in your tank, you don't really know where it came from. And so because of that, you don't really see a lot of advertising for gas stations, right? No, advertisement is going to convince me to go to Racetrack over BP because the only thing I care about is the prices. All right, and there shouldn't be any barriers to entry. It should be easy to come and go out of the market. This is the main reason why perfect competitions aren't super common, because usually there's some kind of barriers to entry. Even with gas stations, there's startup costs, there's licenses you have to get. I would say the most common type of market structure would be monopolistic competitions. With this, you can think about fast food restaurants, right? So with this, you've got a lot of sellers, whose products are all kind of different from one another. Big Mac's different than a Whopper, is different than a Baconator. And so because of that, they're trying to convince people to buy their product on things other than the price. They have control over their prices. Chick-fil-A can charge more for their meals than Zaxby's. It could be because of their quality. It could be because of the goofy advertising they have with the cows. It could be their cleanliness. And so they have some level of advertising. And the barriers to entry should be pretty limited. People should be able to come and go out of the market. And the easy way you can see that is fast food restaurants pop up all the time. An oligopoly would be like these drugstores, right? The three big ones, you've got Rite Aid, CVS, Walgreens. So there's some competition, but not a lot of it. They do have a little bit of control over their prices. And if you go from a Walgreens to a Rite Aid, they're all going to look a little bit different from one another. So because of that, they'd rather compete on other things. Like if you think of like cell phones as well, you've got Apple, Android, trying to think of who the other big ones are, Samsung. And so they want to compete on things other than prices too, because they want to sell their phones for as much as possible. So they might advertise their FaceTime or their texting capabilities or the way that you can edit apps and things like that. They would rather advertise on things other than prices. But there needs to be some kind of barriers to entry there. Otherwise, there would be a lot more competition. So the key difference here between monopolistic competition and oligopoly is the number of sellers that you have. For a pure monopoly, there's just one seller, right? They have complete control over their prices generally. There's no differentiation because there's no other sellers. And they can advertise to increase the demand for their product, but they're not going to advertise compared to other things. And so there would be some kind of barrier to entry there that would prevent competition from popping up. One second. I think those are the main things that I wanted to cover. Yep. So we'll go and switch over to the Google Meet, and we'll talk about the rest of our day together. Thank you, guys.